capture inquiry has resumed in Parktown, Johannesburg. Remember, this week, much of the focus is on the SABC. And I'm just looking at the person on the stand or giving testimony today is Krivani Pillay, who is an executive producer here at the SABC. Let's go to Parktown.
Fair that the evidence you will give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. If so, please raise your right hand and say, I truly affirm.
I truly affirm.
Ms. Krivani, you have submitted two statements to the Commission.
Ms. Pillay.
Ms. Pillay, sorry. We've become very acquainted. Apologies. Apologies, Ms. Pillay.
No problem at all.
Ms. Pillay, you've submitted two statements to the Commission, the first statement being your main statement and the second statement being your supplementary statement. The purpose of your second statement was to correct mistakes from your first statement.
That's correct.
And also just to put forth additional information that was not contained in your second statement, in your first statement.
That's correct.
Ms. Pillay, is your first name spelled with an I after R?
That's correct,
an E,
Chair.
An I?
It's an I, Krivani.
Yes. I think that the people who prepare these bundles, you have to check. Remember, was it yesterday? Not yesterday, the day before yesterday, that instead of writing, I think, Mzwamadoda, in regard to Mr. Mqakwe, they'd written something else, which I did read out, just something else. And I see here with Ms. Pillay, in the statement it's written correctly, but on the divider is KRE. They must just take the trouble to make sure people's names are written correctly, their surnames are written correctly. It's not difficult.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
We relay that message, Chair.
Okay.
Apologies
right.
for that.
Thank you.
Ms.
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Krivani, the first page of the document in front of you, can you identify that document?
This is the statement that I provided to the Commission.
Your main statement.
My main statement.
And if you turn on page 8 of that same document,
Yes,
is that your signature?
that's correct.
And when did you sign this statement?
On the 13th of August.
And if we go to your second supplementary statement, that would be on page 23.
Yes,
And if we turn over to page 24, is that your signature on that statement?
that's correct.
And can you just identify the corrections?
I'm sorry, what page is the supplementary?
It's on page 23, Chair.
20.
23, 23.
23. Well, I've just seen what they wrote in regard to Mr. Mqakwe, which I talked about. They wrote Mzwamadod instead of Mzwamadoda. So, okay, yes.
Ms. Pillay, can you just identify the corrections that you wanted to amend on your main statement?
The correction was the chronological order, just to get the date of the time of events, which was paragraphs 10 and 11 in my original statement. And in my supplementary, I added the letter that my colleagues Busisiwe Ntuli and Jacques Steenkamp had sent to Mr. Motsoneng and the news executives.
And other than that, though, and other than those corrections and additions, are you satisfied with both your main and supplementary statement?
Yes, sorry, one more thing is in paragraph 20 of my main statement, I mentioned that I received an email saying that there would be no analysis of President Zuma's State of the Nation address. The correction, it was not an email, it was a verbal instruction.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. Ms. Pillay, can you please tell us where you're currently employed?
I'm currently employed at the SABC in my current title of Executive Producer of SAFM Current Affairs. I was recently seconded for the duration of November 2018 to June 2019 as Head of Elections for SABC News, coordinating election content for radio, television, and digital. I'm now back to my original title of Executive Producer of SAFM Current Affairs.
And can you just give us just a short background of how long you've been with the SABC and just a short career background?
I've been a journalist for almost 19 years, of which 16 has been with broken service at the SABC. I started off as an intern while studying at Rhodes University at the SABC newsroom in Durban. And subsequently, once I got my undergrad, my Bachelor of Journalism from Rhodes, I worked at the university a little bit, and then I went on to join the newsroom as a field reporter and as a current affairs anchor. I worked my way up through the ranks, particularly in radio, and then was headhunted to join SAFM Current Affairs in 2007, where I stayed and worked my way up to senior anchor, senior producer. I then took a break from the SABC and I went to the EWN newsroom and ENCA newsroom, where I worked as both an anchor and then assignments and editor for ENCA. Came back to SABC in the position that I currently hold. My qualifications, I matriculated at Durban Girls Secondary School. I then have a Bachelor of Journalism from Rhodes as well as a Master's. I have a Diploma of European Journalism from the Hogeschool of Utrecht in the Netherlands. I have a Diploma in Advanced Broadcasting from the Thomson Foundation and Cardiff University. I have a Diploma in Essentials in Broadcast Management from the Sol Plaatje Institute and Rhodes University. And I have a Diploma in Media Executive Training Program with Bloomberg and the Gordon Institute of Business Science with the University of Pretoria.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. Ms. Pillay, in paragraph 3 of your main statement, that would be on page 1, the investigators of the commission approached you. Can you just identify the purpose of this approach?
Well, it was to find out about the so-called editorial interference at the SABC and to get to share the evidence and our experiences of what we went through in the watershed time of 2016 for about a period of about 18 months as the so-called SABC 8.
Thank you. Ms. Pillay, from paragraph 6, that would be on page 2 of your main statement, where you highlight the editorial and political interference. There was a media statement that was issued according to ban protest policy. Can you just touch base and talk to that?
Okay, so on the 26th of May 2016, Chair, we'd heard through a media statement that Hlaudi Motsoeneng had decided to implement, it was not, we called it the protest policy, but there was not a formal policy, where you would ban visuals of protest action. And we weren't told as a news division officially. We all had to find out through a media statement. And as the executive producer of the show of SAFM Current Affairs, I together with my colleague Aubrey Sechia, we co-manage a team. At the time, the shows were called AM Live, Midday Live, and PM Live. And our team of senior producers decided to tackle this issue on the Sunday morning edition of the program called The Editors. The Editors is a program that really looks at the media industry as a whole. We reflect on the decisions we have made as editorial staff. We look at how our colleagues over the different platforms have covered news. And it's interesting to give this kind of information to the citizenry because the angles that certain broadcasters, certain newspapers may take could have to do with who owns them. You know, some people take one angle of covering the story, others take a different view. And it's part of our approach in the Editors to give our listeners all types, and it was a very popular program. And on the Sunday, the first Sunday after this media statement was issued, the Editors took to analyze this statement. When we did so, we have editors coming in, we have listeners calling in, and we have an anchor who manages the program. Unfortunately, that didn't go down well with Mr. Motsoeneng, and we were subsequently called in to discuss why we had taken that stance.
I'm sorry, that program where the editors have this engagement, would it be on SAFM?
Yes, it was on SAFM on a Sunday morning.
To a certain time?
Yes.
And the editors, would it be editors within SABC, or you would invite editors from outside as well, or how was it composed?
Because the program was an SABC news program, we would try our absolute best. The senior producers and the producers would try their best to ensure that one SABC editor would be on the program, and then the other supporting editors would be from other media houses. That's correct.
But the focus would not just be SABC news, it would include other media houses, their publications.
That's
and
correct.
Their broadcasts.
That's correct, Chair. Chair, so sometimes some newspapers will have an exclusive. They would break a story, for example, the Rapport or the Star. We would invite that editor to come that weekend to give us the background to that exclusive breaking story. How did they get the information? How long did the story take, you know, from the time they got it to the time that they broadcast it? Because what happens generally in the media industry is one publication or broadcaster can break a story, but once it's out there, it's fair play for everybody else to then start tackling the story in their news diary. So this is one of the reasons we do that. We find the first people to have that exclusivity, and we invite them on the show.
Would part of what you would be looking at in that program be to what extent there had been fairness to affected parties in regard to each story and so on? Would that be part of what you look at to enable the citizenry to appreciate what trouble editors take in order before a story is issued, or not really?
No, you're absolutely right, Chair. We would discuss that. For example, I remember when I was sitting in as an anchor for that show, we did a program where there was a bloodied picture on the front page of the newspaper, and we discussed the merits of publishing such a picture, because, you know, it's free for all, and children are actually also having a look at that, because in broadcasting, you have watershed times, and you can protect children from some content. But, for example, so I remember on that particular day, so that would be some of the discussions we have. Did that particular newspaper make the right decision in putting such a bloodied picture on their front page? Those are the kind of editorial discussions that takes place.
So then, within the context of the policy that had just been issued the media statement relating to the policy about protest pictures that came in regard to asking the question, is it appropriate, is it right for the media not to show protest action? That would be the angle.
That was precisely the angle,
Yes.
Chair.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krivani. Ms. Pillay.
You can call me Ms. Krivani.
No, please stick to Ms. Pillay. then during the tea break, you can you can revert to Krivani.
Yes. Ms. Pillay, you talk about a meeting where you were summoned. You were summoned with Mr. Krige, is that correct?
That's correct.
What was the purpose for being summoned to Mr. Motsoeneng's office?
The purpose of that was, it was about 48 hours after the Sunday program. So Mr. Motsoeneng was aggrieved that the program criticized his decision because callers that had come in on the program wondered the merits of such a decision. At the SABC and for a public broadcaster, it is rather bizarre when you're supposed to be giving a plurality of views and different perspectives on a story, for someone to issue a directive to say we are now banning these pictures. We are supposed to give, and we are duty bound, to give the South African public all access to the South African news and, you know, in all its manner and form, so that they can shape their own opinions of the information we are disseminating. By effectively making such a directive, you are choosing then to decide to edit what the audience, what your viewer, what your listener, what your reader is then going to view. You are making that decision. So this is the kind of criticism that went on that show on Sunday. And we were then called to his office on the Tuesday to discuss Sunday's program.
And who else was in attendance at this meeting? You've highlighted that on paragraph 9 on page 3 of your main statement.
It was Mr. Motsoeneng. It was Jimmy Matthews, at the time he was the acting group chief executive officer. It was the acting GE of news, Mr. Simon Tebele. It was Anton Heernes. Anton Heernes was introduced to us as Mr. Motsoeneng's advisor. It was the GM of Radio News, Ms. Sibolelo Ditlakanyane, SABC spokesperson, Mr. Kaiser Khanyago, and then Mr. Krige Futa and myself.
And in this meeting, you state that the meetings were recorded and everybody was aware that this meeting was recorded.
This is actually the amendment that I made to my supplementary. So the point 11, Chair, point 10 and 11 of this was actually the recording of a news workshop, not the recording of this meeting. That was the correction that I made in my supplementary.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. In paragraph 12 of page 3 of your statement, you've highlighted what Mr. Motsoeneng had said in that particular meeting. Could you just read it out for the record?
We are cleaning up the organization. People are doing their own stuff. There are many journalists outside that want to work for the SABC. The environment outside is bad. No person within the SABC is independent. The SABC is independent. This is the new SABC. You must adapt or find a job somewhere else. Editors Forum must go. It's advertising for rival newspapers. And then he added, if people do not dare get rid of them, we cannot have people who question management, and this is the last time we will have a meeting of this kind.
And Ms. Pillay, I've noted that this is in quotations. Was this word for word of what he had said? Did you take notes of it? How was it? Were you able to put this in your statement because it's in quotation marks?
So to be quite honest with you, Chair, this statement caught me off by guard because I was just in shock that I was actually listening to these kind of statements. So this particular statement, I had only in shorthand, but Futa Krige had made very detailed notes. So when we had done the meeting, Futa had typed out his notes, and I compared to my notes, and this was verbatim.
Okay.
So there are some parts where I've also got it verbatim. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. And just to jump off to paragraph 13,
Yeah.
it continues onto page 4 of your statement. In terms of what Mr. Krige had asked Mr. Motsoeneng about broadcasting the vandalism of public property and so forth. Can you just talk to that paragraph, please?
So Mr. Krige tried to ask Mr. Motsoeneng, Chair, what empirical evidence do you have for all of these decisions to be made? We are not averse to change. Even in the newsroom, change is good. Programs need to be changed. We need to keep up with the trends as long as we follow and adhere to the journalistic prescripts. If a program doesn't work, it's not popular enough, we need to make changes. So we are not averse to change. But when it comes to saying the editors must go, a popular program that has deep editorial values attached to it, a program that has a long history. In fact, when I was trying to do research on how long the program was, even way before '94, the editors has been in session. So Mr. Krige tried to find out, well, what is the thinking behind such decisions that the editors must just go? And Mr. Motsoeneng wasn't able to give us an editorially sound reason. He was not able to rationalize his reasoning. He basically just said we must defend the organization, no journalist is independent, the COO has final responsibility for news. If people do not adhere, get rid of them. We cannot have people who question management. I remember still having my hand up. He refused to even take my question. He was really upset. According to him, we had brought the SABC, or my program had brought the SABC into disrepute because we were discussing a decision he sanctioned. We were discussing a decision he made. But we have to be introspective. We have to be reflective as a newsroom and as an organization. And
it was a matter that affects the public.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not here for our own personal welfare. We're here for country duty, and we're here for public service. And he didn't seem to get that.
So the reference to Editors Forum was a reference to your program.
My
program. That's what it was called.
Yes. And when he said that newspapers must go, Chair, he was making reference to two parts of the newspapers. On a Monday to Friday, a program called AM Live, hosted by Sakina Kamwendo, had a newspapers slot where she would review the headlines of the newspapers. We wouldn't go through the newspaper page by page, but we would look at the general headlines of the day. And then the editors would also have a few minutes, about 3 minutes, where we look at the Sunday papers. And it is common practice. It's age-old tradition. It's done on international broadcasters as well. One of the reasons we do this, there's two reasons we do this. Some newspapers are not national. They're only available in certain parts of the country. It's important for listeners and viewers to know what's happening around the country. That's number one. Number two, it's also important to see what angle the SABC has taken and what angle Times Live has taken, or what angle the SABC has taken and what angle the Citizen has taken, for example. It's to give that kind of varying coverage, plurality of views and perspectives. This really is what the editors is all about.
Well, I happen to know that in one of the TV channels that shows what's happening in England, they have those discussions like that. I think, particularly, on Saturday evening
BBC.
for the Sunday ones,
Yes.
Preview and look at different newspapers. And I think within the country, there are other people who do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's common industry practice. Yeah.
Yes, but he didn't like that either.
Well, I don't think I don't think he had an issue with the program at all itself. It was just because this Sunday catapulted him to the top of the agenda. His decision was criticized. His decision was then being debated and disputed on the show. And this must have got his attention.
But because of that, he was now saying the program must go.
The program must go.
Because that's what you say here. Okay.
And the newspapers must go as well. So the newspapers on the AM Live portion of the morning and the newspapers on the editor's program.
Yes. Okay.
Ms. Pillay, you've just stated in paragraph 13 what Mr. Motsoeneng had said. Just in the second line, the COO has the final responsibility for news. Was this the first time that you have heard that the COO has the final responsibility for news, or was this a norm?
This was the first time that I had heard from him that the final responsibility of news, because I'd only come back to the SABC. Sorry, Chair.
Yes, you must look at me more than.
Sorry, Chair. Chair, this was the first time that I'd heard that, because I'd only just recently returned to the SABC. It was a couple of months prior to that. So when I'd heard that, I thought maybe he made a mistake. But then Jimmy Matthews was sitting, right next to him, and he didn't correct him. And that's when I'd also heard subsequently, no, but this is the angle in which he is moving toward. He's apparently made changes that the editor-in-chief is now the COO and not the CEO.
Ms. Pillay, and in paragraph 15 of your statement, you talk about the cancellation of the editors. What was the aftermath and consequence of the removal of this show?
It was awful. Chair?
So the program was actually moved?
It was cancelled. It was cancelled immediately. It was the lowest point of my career, because it was left up to me to have to go to my colleagues, my senior producers and producers, and let them know what had just transpired in the meeting. I felt embarrassed. I felt like I let the team down. I did try my best to garner reasoning from Mr. Motsoeneng that I can take back to my team. He wouldn't listen to he wouldn't even entertain my questions at that meeting. And I was basically told, you have no choice in the matter, and if you don't do it, my job was threatened. I subsequently came back to the office, and we made the announcement to the team. It didn't sit well with me at all. I had sleepless nights afterwards, because when I was a student at Rhodes University, SAFM was the program, it was the pinnacle program that a journalist worked toward. And the fact that I was now sitting in a position that I had aspired to be sitting in, and a program of this caliber was removed under my watch, I really felt that I let down my team, and I let down listeners, and I took it quite personally. My colleague Busisiwe Ntuli then, after hearing about what happened, Thandeka and Busi had come to my office, and Busi basically said, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I can't be quiet anymore, because this has gone too far. And that's when Busisiwe Ntuli, Jacques Steenkamp, and myself sat down to draft this letter to Mr. Motsoeneng. And Busisiwe and Jacques said, we will support you. It's not our program, but we will support you because we believe in the program. And we also believe that what he's done is wrong. So we got together, the three of us, and we drafted this letter. By this time, our colleagues Thandeka, Futa, and Suna were already suspended. Thandeka joined us when we had our meeting. And we looked at the journalistic prescripts. We looked at editorial independence. And we drafted a letter, and we asked Mr. Motsoeneng, we just want you to tell us, guide us as to your thinking as to why these programs in the newspapers are cancelled. Tell us why you are suspending colleagues who are just debating. And we sent that letter off. And I only felt better once that letter was sent. So we sent off that letter, but the senior producers, I had asked them to keep all the emails. And Chair, every day, without fail, every day we were getting emails. I still have them stored on my laptop. The senior producers were collecting disgruntled emails from listeners who have been listening for years, and listeners who are in rural areas. Remember, radio is a very powerful tool. There's only a few people that are on social media, but radio is accessible to everyone. And they were very upset, and they wanted the program to come back. And quite a few listeners, including one, Anita Yonker, a lecturer at a university, she went straight to the BCCSA. And the rest of the listeners came to us, and we still forwarded those emails to Mr. Motsoeneng, but nobody was willing to listen.
Can I take you back? I should have asked you earlier. When the media statement that told the public about what you later termed the protest policy, you said that you only got to know about it from the media. Was it usual at SABC that if there was to be a new policy on something, or if there was to be a change of policy on something, there would be no consultation, prior consultations with all those who may be affected by it?
Yes and no, Chair. Sometimes there is consultation and sometimes there isn't. We have in the organization what we call rediffusion, where everybody from across the country and all the officers tune in and listen when either the executives of the board get together to disseminate information to us, or to perhaps talk about the possibility of introducing a new policy, to gauge views. So that's one way. Sometimes it happens, but there was certainly no consultation. This was a directive.
On this
Yes.
This particular one. And the issue that the final responsibility for news now lay with him, and I think you have said and other witnesses said that the norm was that the editor-in-chief would be the group CEO. Now, was that also not notified to the newsroom, to the news people in advance?
I stand to be corrected, Chair.
Yes.
In my recollection, I was not notified via
Yes.
email or via rediffusion or
Yes.
anything.
You only got to know at the meeting?
Yes.
Yes, okay, all right. Thank you. Then let's go back to you were talking about the reaction of the listeners of the program to the cancellation of the program. If you still want to say something, you can continue.
Chair, I also I received a lot of hate mail on social media, which some of it is still there, where people thought that I made the decision to cancel the editors because I am the executive producer of the show. It was very hard for me to have to go through that because it was not of my doing, but I was not going to undertake a discussion with listeners on social media. A statement was never issued to say that it was Mr. Motsoeneng's decision, so I had to bear the brunt, but eventually, obviously, with the advent of speaking out and with Parliament, etc., then the viewers realized it was not of my personal doing that the program was cancelled. Also, I used to field a lot of telephone calls. My office number was circulated, and I would sit on the phone with listeners, and they were very upset. And that's the extent of the disgruntled nature of our listeners, and it was very sad, because this is effectively the people we have to serve.
The media statement which had announced the policy did not make it clear that it was Mr. Msoneng who had made the decision. Did it simply say SABC without saying who?
I do not recall. I wonder if it is here as a...
Okay, well, if it is, we'll check. I just think of this situation where people think you are the one who made the decision when you didn't make the decision.
Public perception is a cruel thing,
yes,
Chair.
Yes.
Even when a year ago there were changes made to SAFM, where current affair hours were reduced drastically from 6 hours to 2 hours a day, I was also had to bear the brunt of social media bullying, because it was very popular programs that were cancelled, AM Live and PM Live. And that too, listeners thought that I was behind that, and some of them went as far as likening me to Mr. Motsoeneng, saying that I'm as bad as he is. And again, I kept quiet. I blocked people who were bullying me on social media, but I never engaged. I just didn't engage with the public on social media.
Thank you.
Thank you. The media statement, we currently do not have it, but during the tea break, we can attempt to source the chair.
That's fine.
Ms. Pillay, just to stay just on top of your evidence, you mentioned a letter that was sent. That is attached on your supplementary statement. That's on page 25, Chair.
Actually, earlier on, I thought I had found the supplementary statement, but I discovered that I had not. Now I've found it. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
So you say the letter is attached to the supplementary statement?
Yes, Chair, on page 25.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Ms. Pillay, is this the letter that was sent to Mr. Motsoeneng after the canning of the editors?
That's correct.
Chair, this letter is quite lengthy, but I find it very critical that Ms. Pillay does read it into record.
Yes, well, she can do one of two things. One, if she is able to tell me the main features of the contents of the letter without reading it, maybe reading one or two paragraphs, that's fine. But if you think there is particular importance in reading the whole letter, that would be fine. Well, what is your own sense?
Chair, my own sense is that the entirety of the letter is important because it touches base on the editors. It also touches base of, the purging, the suspension of the other members of the SABCH and so forth in that context.
That's fine. Okay. She may read it.
Ms. Pillay, could you also just identify, from the top, who the letter was sent to, who was also CC'd in the letter, and the contents of the letter?
Okay. Chair, the letter was for attention SABC Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng, at SABC Radio Park, corner of Henley and Artillery Road. It was also copied to Jimmy Matthews, Acting Group CEO, to Simon Tebele, Acting GE News, to Sibulelo Ditlakanyane, GM Radio News, to Nyana Molete, Acting GM TV, to Angie Capelianis, National Editor Radio Current Affairs, to Notando Maseko, Acting Head TV Current Affairs, and to Zolisa Sigabi, National Bulletin Editor. The title was Request for Editorial Policy Clarity and Concern over Unfair Suspensions. We, the undersigned, write this letter to you to register our displeasure and increasing concern about the recent developments occurring in the SABC newsroom. Our newsroom has become a source of derision, despair, and criticism from the people that we are fundamentally accountable to, the public at large. In particular, the developments of the past week have heightened the sense of fear, lack of clarity about our journalistic responsibility, and low staff morale permeating our newsrooms because of what we consider to be normal editorial engagements and the usual contestation of ideas during a diary meeting. In addition, we are of the view that the recent decisions to remove the newspaper slots and the editors on SAFM's AM Live amounts to what we consider censorship, unless reasonable and professional explanations can be advanced within the framework of our editorial policy and our obligation to serve the public. As seasoned journalists within the SABC, we maintain that the reasons given for these sudden decisions contradict our governing policies and legislation, namely the SABC Editorial Code, the South African Broadcasting Act, and the South African Constitution. As journalists having to operationalize the policies of this public institution, which is important for the promotion of our democracy, we feel aggrieved that the image of our institution, our journalistic integrity, continues to be compromised by unconstitutional pronouncements that erode the credibility of the SABC and the journalistic integrity of all of us who work for it. Furthermore, we wish to register our deep concern for our colleagues who have been suspended for expressing their right to freedom of expression by simply debating and assessing the newsworthiness of events as expected during editorial meetings. As such, we view the suspensions of Thandeka Gqubule, Futa Krige, and Suna Venter as acts of victimization. An editorial meeting is to debate, deliberate, argue, and find consensus on news stories. However, based on the recent developments, it seems that this is no longer allowed during editorial line talks, a situation that we believe needs to be challenged. We are ethically and legally bound by the provisions of the South African Constitution, in particular, Section 161A, Chapter 2 in the Bill of Rights. Likewise, we are bound by the Broadcasting Act and the SABC's mandate from the South African public. We are shocked by the latest pronouncements that fundamentally erode the right of the public to know the whole story about the developments in their communities and to display such stories in a responsible manner, as has been done as per ICASA and BCCSA requirements. These pronouncements effectively render our newsrooms incapable of providing compelling audiovisual content that educates and informs the public to disseminate balanced and accurate information. We, the undersigned, therefore request an urgent meeting with the COO to gain clarity and resolve the above indicated matters. Our primary interest is to clarify the confusion and find a lasting solution that will also provide guidelines on all issues editorial. Lastly, we hope that this will also restore our public image and uphold our integrity in the eyes of those we are meant to serve. Signed, Busisiwe Ntuli, Executive Producer, Special Assignment, Krivani Pillay, Executive Producer, SAFM Current Affairs, and Jacques Steenkamp, Senior Investigative Reporter.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. Did you ever receive a response or, a meeting with the then CEO, Mr. Mtsoneng?
No, Chair, I didn't.
I take it that that reference to Section 161A, Chapter 2 in the Bill of Rights may have been a typo, because you must have been referring to Section 16,
yes.
Subsection 1A,
Yes.
Which deals with freedom of expression and so on.
That's correct,
Yes,
Chair.
okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. What was the consequence, if any, what happened after issuing this letter?
After issuing this letter was issued on Saturday or Sunday. On the Monday morning, Jimmy Matthews had resigned via social media. We all found out via social media, Chair. And then 4 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, I was given notice to appear before a disciplinary hearing on the Friday. was given less than 24 hours notice to appear.
When that happened, there had been no response from Mr. Mswaneng to the letter, or there had been?
There had been no response. That was the
Or
first
was
time.
that the response?
That was the response, was the disciplinary hearing.
Okay.
Ms. Pillay, if you could just turn to page 27. It's just after the letter.
Yes.
Is this the letter you're speaking about, the response that you received for you to go to disciplinary hearing? Can you just talk to this letter?
So this is the letter I received after the disciplinary hearing. There's one letter missing, which is the first one, which we'll try and get to you. Sorry, Chair. Sorry.
Yes.
The one letter is the invite to the disciplinary hearing.
Yes.
Which was a Thursday afternoon to be there for a disciplinary hearing on a Friday morning. I had not been unionized at that time, and my colleagues quickly rallied around me to basically sign union membership forms. The first union I called was CWU. I was told that a shop steward would come and meet me. The shop steward came and basically wasted my time, because I subsequently found out that CWU had no intention to represent me. I called Bamau. I was not a member of Bamau, but Bamau already had another disciplinary hearing that their shop steward was attending the next day. I effectively had no assistance. I waited till 7 o'clock for CWU to return to my office to assist me in preparing for this disciplinary hearing. Nobody arrived. I then looked out of the SABC. A friend of mine is a lawyer by profession. She then arrived at my home, and upon one look at the notice for DC, laughed it off, saying it was less than 24 hours to appear before a DC. That in itself is against labor laws. But she did nevertheless help me prep. I got to the DC on Friday morning, and
Before we get to the DC, what was the charge that the letter that called you to a disciplinary inquiry told you were going to face, or charges?
they said that we were we had basically brought the SABC into disrepute. So that we wrote a letter.
Or is the letter page 27 the one that you got? Or does it reflect the charges?
So this is similar to the charges that were in the first letter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's why I'm trying to recall, I beg your pardon, Chair,
Yes.
what was in that first one, which
Yes.
I will ensure that I get to the evidence
Yes,
leaders.
but you say the
These are
charges
pretty
referred
much-
to here are basically the same.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, okay. Let's hear what the charges are before we get to the actual hearing. Maybe she can read.
Yes, Ms. Pillay, can you just read the
Or
charges?
just say what the charges are.
You are hereby notified in terms of Schedule 8 of the Labor Relations Act, number 66 of 95, that allegations have been received that you are continuing to commit further acts of misconduct after receiving your letter informing you of your disciplinary hearing. So these were additional to the first disciplinary
ones.
letter, Chair. So the fact that we were speaking to the media, so you wrote and signed a letter to the SABC COO raising concerns in relation to the instruction given by him and leaked it to the media platforms, thereby displaying disrespect and persistence in your refusal to comply with an instruction pertaining to the editorial policy of the SABC, as well as the directive not to broadcast visuals, audio of the destruction of property during protest action. Since the policies and personnel...
I'm sorry, before that, am I right to think that paragraph 1.1, which you have just read, seems to suggest that even raising concerns with this COO was a problem?
That's correct, Chair. And that's also
how can
how...
that be a problem when somebody raises concerns with you about issues at work?
This is the kind of environment we worked in at that time, Chair. Nothing made sense, really. The directives that were issued out, just nothing made sense. I want to say it was the ramblings of a madman, so, you know, to edit it, but yes. Really nothing made sense, just us inquiring about it. And it was a very diplomatic letter, in my opinion, that we had sent out.
Well, maybe there might, in certain circumstances, maybe there might be something about any allegation of leaking it outside, but when one reads that, one gets this sense that part of the problem is that you raised concerns.
Yes, we questioned the decision.
And how does it become
and how do you work in a newsroom?
To raise concerns?
Newsroom journalistic principles are all about asking questions. Any story you do, you ask a question. That's how we get our stories. And how is it that you can run a newsroom without allowing the very people who are supposed to be asking questions by profession are not supposed to ask you questions?
And what do you do if you don't understand the directive?
Well, we
without
wouldn't
raising
know,
concerns?
Because we were never afforded the audience or the response to our letter.
Yeah. Yes, okay, all right. 1.2.
1.2, since the policies and personnel regulations are incorporated into your employment contract, your conduct, as stated above, constitutes a contravention of paragraph 2D of the regulations, in that you made comments or published an article in the media on your terms and conditions of the contract while you are in service of the SABC without prior consent of the Group Chief Executive. 1.3, it also contravenes Regulation 2E in that it constitutes a refusal to obey and carry out reasonable and lawful instructions, including the policies and regulations of the SABC. It amounts to insubordination and contravenes Clause 2.1 of the Disciplinary Code and Procedure. 1.4, it undermines the editorial responsibility and authority of the SABC as vested upon its Chief Operating Officer in terms of paragraph 2 of the SABC Revised Editorial Policies 2016. Point 2, since receiving your, so those are just the charges now, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Maybe for the sake of completeness, you can read the last two paragraphs.
Point 2, since receiving your disciplinary hearing notice, you continuously took part in media interviews with various daily newspapers, resulting in the publication of articles wherein you'd criticized and displayed disrespect and persistence in your refusal to comply with an instruction pertaining to the editorial policy of the SABC, as well as the directive not to broadcast visuals, audio of the destruction of property during protest action. Your conduct constituted a contravention of the prescripts set out in paragraphs 1.2 to 1.4. Now, point number 3, you are accordingly afforded an opportunity to state your case in response to these allegations. In that regard, you're entitled to prepare that response with your assistance of a trade union representative, a fellow employee, or lawyers of your own choice. Such response must be delivered to my office no later than 4 o'clock on Friday, the 15th of July, failing which I will assume you have no answer to the allegations leveled against you.
Okay, before we proceed, I just want to take you back to soon after you had sent the letter to Mr. Mswaneng and to the copied other people, including Mr. Jimmy Matthews. You said that you sent the letter on a Saturday, and
I beg your pardon, Chair, it was a Sunday.
Oh, Sunday.
Yes.
Oh, yes, and then you said soon thereafter, or was it the following day, Mr. Jimmy Matthews resigned.
So if I correctly remember, it was early evening Sunday night, Chair. We'd sent off the letter, we'd all met to sign, scan it and send it. And on my way to work on Monday morning, around about 7 o'clock, I received a phone call from another media house asking if I had heard about the resignation of Jimmy Matthews, and that was how I found out. And there was about a couple of hours later that I'd seen the social media post that he had indeed resigned.
Do you know whether his resignation was connected in any way with the stand that you, or what you said in the letter as a group?
I found the timing to be quite coincidental.
Yes.
But I could not say for sure, Chair.
Say. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. On that letter, page 28, paragraph 2, it is stated that...
Sorry, what page?
Page 28, Chair.
Okay.
Paragraph 2. It is stated that the directive not to broadcast destruction of property in protests and so forth, was that in line with the editorial policy?
That was not in line with the editorial policy. The editorial policy is clear. Chair, I beg your pardon. The editorial policy is clear. The only thing that we are not going to broadcast, if something incites violence or racism or things that are against our Bill of Rights and the Constitution, that is, you know, there's a whole lot of prescripts, editorial prescripts. I don't understand how showing the destruction of property. I want to give you some context, Chair. These protest action are service delivery protests that were occurring across the country. The timing of this was just weeks before an election. All the people that we were interviewing, that we were viewing, the community leaders that we had on our programs talked about service delivery. They talked about access to water and sanitation. They talked about homes. They talked about jobs. They talked about food. They talked about infrastructure, right? They then named their councillors. They named the governing party. They named government. According to them, their leaders were to blame for non-service delivery. So when somebody says, I'm going to ban this, the audio and the video, weeks before an election, when somebody is criticizing an administration in power that's also running for the same election, how else do you interpret that, Chair? For me, that was already the start of a capture.
Well, let me take you back before we proceed. Let's go back to that meeting where you were confronted about the protest policy, as you came to call it.
Yes.
You said that Mr. Griffer did say something. You said that you raised your hand, you wanted to say something, but you were not given a chance. Were there other people who spoke at that meeting other than Mr. Musoneng, and I think you said Mr. Jimmy Matthews also spoke? Were there other people who spoke at the meeting, and if so, what did they say?
The GM of radio, Ms. Sibolelo Ditlakanyane, was there with us. She attempted to defend the show, the editors, but he still wouldn't listen to her, even though she was my line manager's manager. So, very senior person, but he wouldn't, you know, he wouldn't even let her finish her sentence, as senior as she was. So he didn't let her speak, and he didn't let me speak.
I just want to make sure I don't mix up issues. There's only one meeting, I think, that we have talked about so far. Did it discuss both the issue of the program, the Editors Forum and newspapers, and the protest policy, or was there no meeting at which the protest policy was discussed?
This was the one and only meeting I had with Mr. Motsoneng, Chair,
yes,
in which he discussed the editors and the newspapers with my programs, and because those programs were talking about the protest policy.
Also, the protest policy
was the content,
discussed because of
on
that.
those
Okay,
programs.
okay, so I got it right. Okay, so only those people spoke.
Yes.
At that meeting.
Yes.
And Mr. Krieger spoke, but did Mr. Mswaneng say to you why he thought it was justified to come up with this policy at that meeting?
There was no justification, Chair. He said he was in charge. To
Yes.
paraphrase, Chair, these are not the exact words. It was basically my decision goes.
Yes. Okay, no, thank you. And I think when I interrupted you, we were about to talk about the disciplinary hearing. And because I wanted to know what the charges were, we went to a letter that seems to have been a later letter. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Yes. So I just want to make sure we don't end up skipping the disciplinary hearing. What happened to it?
Yes. Ms. Pillay, you stated, just for clarity purposes, because we have dealt with this subsequent letter you received after the first letter.
Yes.
You said you received less than 24 hours to appear at the disciplinary hearing. You received it on Thursday. Friday was supposed to be your DC. Now, with this letter, it's dated the 8th of July, and you were to write a response to these charges on the 15th of July. Now, that's more than 24 hours. When did you receive this letter, the third letter?
So this is the second letter, 8th of
second
July, Chair, is
Yes,
the second
yes.
letter.
The one that you got on
So
a Thursday, you said you don't have here,
I don't
but you will
have.
try and
So
get it
that
for
would be
us.
Thursday's
Yeah.
date for Friday's disciplinary.
Yes.
Fri-
Was it the 16th of June? I thought I saw some date where that Thursday.
No, it couldn't have been the 16th of June, Chair. It would have been end June, early July.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Chair, so I went to the disciplinary hearing with Jacques Steenkamp and Busisiwe and Tuli, who had their labor union reps with them, and Solidarity kindly offered to assist me free of charge because I was, for want of a better word, a lone ranger there on Friday without any union representativity. And Solidarity had told me that they would represent me pro bono and sit with me in the DC. That DC started, and because of the argument that we
And
had...
who was chairing it?
Chair, I can't remember, but it was a gentleman that was flown in from, I think, Free State Province,
Okay.
flown in specifically to chair this
Hearing.
DC.
Okay.
And so into it, the union representatives argued why the DC could not go ahead, and the
I'm sorry. This DC, you have mentioned a number of other colleagues of yours that came with you, but that DC was for you only, or where there were a number of you facing charges in the same disciplinary hearing?
the three of us who wrote the letter to Mr. Motsoneng et al.
So it was a joint
It
disciplinary
was a
hearing?
joint disciplinary
Okay,
hearing
okay,
for the three
all
of
right.
us.
Yes,
Chair.
okay. You may continue.
Thank you, Chair. And when they argued that this DC could not go ahead for various reasons, it was then adjourned. But it was never rescheduled. The rescheduling was the 8th of July, Chair, this letter.
You got this letter,
We
yes.
got this letter to then provide a written response
Yes, okay.
by the 15th of July. And then in this letter, they added more because they felt because of the media interviews
Yes,
and
you were
all of that.
continuing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was more charges here. And then our lawyers subsequently responded to that letter, meeting the deadline of 4 o'clock on the 15th of July. But unfortunately, they didn't find our responses good enough, and we were subsequently fired on the 18th of July.
Now, there was no disciplinary hearing now.
No.
Originally, the idea was that there was going to be a disciplinary hearing,
Yes, Chair.
and This letter of the 8th of July had said that your response had to reach them by 1600, 4 o'clock on Friday, 15 July, failing which the writer would assume that you had no answer to the allegations leveled against you. So one could say, well, if there was no response by the deadline, they might have taken the attitude that there's no need for a hearing because these people are admitting these allegations, but the response was filed. And one would then have expected that there would then be a date for a hearing. But you say there was no such date, there was just a decision to fire.
That's 100% correct, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, they actually acknowledged receipt of our response, and I didn't, I'm paraphrasing again, I don't know the legal jargon
Yes.
that was used, basically to say, we've gone, your lawyers have sent us a response, we've gone through it, and we have taken the decision to terminate.
Okay, something like...
Something like that, yes.
The response has no merit or something
Absolutely.
like that, yeah. Okay, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Pillay. So you filed your legal representatives filed their responses on Friday before 4 o'clock, and you were subsequently filed, you said the 18th, was the 18th on that Monday?
On that Monday.
So
I remember it clearly because it was Nelson Mandela's birthday, Chair. And that's a personal hero of mine. So it just felt very ironic.
Yes.
That the person who encouraged me to get into journalism, I would be fired on his birthday.
Ms. Pillay, on paragraph 18, let's go back to the statement on page 5.
We go back to what page?
Page 5 of the main statement, Chair. That would be under folder 14, Chair.
Yes, you must just remind me about the folder. The
Folder
divider,
CC 14.
because I close when we move to another page. I close completely.
That's fine, Chair. I'll be here to
Yes.
remind you.
Okay.
Paragraph 18, well, the second paragraph of just under 18, the subsequent paragraph. It states that the cancellation of the editors, Mr. Mutsuneng justified it. Can you just elaborate on Mr. Mutsuneng's justification of the cancellation of the program?
Okay. So it would seem then that the only reason for the cancellation was that the program criticized, Chair, the decision of Mr. Mutsuneng's protest policy. The argument that Mr. Mutsuneng made was that the program was promoting the sale of newspapers whose editors were interviewed. And I felt that that argument was irrelevant because newspapers are not the direct competition of any broadcaster. Mr. Mutsuneng made this argument at the time when the SABC was promoting the Gupta-owned New Age newspaper through its New Age breakfast briefings on SABC TV. I also want to add that when they cancelled the newspapers, shortly after the actual newspaper itself was removed, citing austerity measures. One of the reasons the actual newspapers that we usually use every
Yes.
morning when we're, before we do our diaries,
Yes.
those were removed. But there were copious amounts of the New Age everywhere, 10 copies per table, almost. Like it was really bizarre. Because if you're going to cite, selling newspapers, then that newspaper had no business of being there with so many copies.
Did you or people in the newsroom raise this to say, you have just said, we're not going to have these newspapers anymore as part of austerity measures. How come we have, stacks and stacks of the New Age?
We didn't raise it formally, Chair. We did speak about it amongst ourselves, the producers, the senior producers. We even brought it to the attention of our line managers. And austerity was cited as one of the reasons for removing the main newspapers, the ones that we were used to getting every day. And when we made we didn't really make a formal argument. We all just amongst ourselves, you know, in our
say how is this austerity measures if you bring in this one, and not just in
but we also knew
big volumes,
which were our battles. If he wasn't going to respond to a formal letter that senior journalists had written, was he going to answer about the New Age newspaper?
Ms. Pillay, you talk about the New Age newspapers being a stack of 10 per table and so forth.
Well, the meeting table, not per desk.
Yes,
Sorry.
Yes.
Was the distribution of the New Age newspapers, was this a daily occurrence of these newspapers being brought in? Was it an astronomical amount? Was it, you know, a manageable amount that it's one newspaper per employee? Can you just talk to that?
I can't really put my finger on the number, Chair. I would arrive for my shift and there'd probably be about 5 or 6 of the newspapers stacked around a meeting table. There would be 1 or 2 around other tables. But unfortunately, Chair, I'm so sorry, but I can't put my finger on the exact number that was there on a daily basis. I just know that there were many copies of the New Age available.
By the time this by the time of your disciplinary action and the removal of other newspapers, do you have a recollection of about how long the New Age had been around in terms of being made available at SABC, being delivered in big numbers?
I honestly can't recall,
You can't
Chair.
remember?
No.
Okay, but it had been there for some time?
Yes, as far
yes.
as my memory.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've noted that it's 11:15. I don't know if the Chair would like to take the tea break now before we carry on with further editorial.
How much more time do you think we need before she is done?
I think we would take another, about my estimation, 45 minutes at most.
Oh, okay. No, that's. I was looking at her statement and I was thinking it's less than that, but that's fine. I think let's take the tea break. I think your watch and my watch are not giving us the exact time. Mine is still a few minutes before 15:15, but it's okay. There's no point in starting another question now. We'll take the tea adjournment now, and we will resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
All rise.